Hello, everyone, and welcome to this month's KMC Consulting Lunch and Learn webinar. So glad you're here. So glad you're present and participating. I think it's going to be a great topic. Today, it's titled Minimizing Electrical and Utility Consumption in Buildings Through Airflow Management and Optimization. My name is Tim Vogel. I'm VP of Connected Solutions here at KMC Controls, and I'm proud to present our three wonderful panelists today. I have Bala Gnanam. He is VP of Sustainability, Advocacy, and Stakeholder Relations at BOMA Canada. That's Building Owners and Managers Association of Canada. Welcome, Bala. We have Dave Love. He's the Chief Growth Officer at Alberio Energy. Hello, Dave. And Jesse Shoemaker, VP of Business Development here at KMC Controls, comrade in arms. And it's a real pleasure to have all you guys here today. Ari Rubin, who leads our KMC Consulting Group, is unable to join us today. He is on holiday, but please, after this, he is one of the key contacts for any of this content and how KMC Consulting can help you. And so please reach out to him for any questions or follow-up that you'd be interested. Along with any of us here on the call, we would all be very interested in having these kinds of conversations with you. And with that, one more housekeeping tip. If you have any questions, please feel free to leave them in the chat. If we have time and if we do get questions at the end, we'll make sure to dip into that bucket and continue our conversation around the topic and around the things that you are most interested in. Okay, let's dig in. Energy and airflow optimization. Jesse, I'm going to start with you. So we all know that the most expensive air and thus the greatest tax on energy usage, consumption, and cost is outside air. And when you bring it in, we have to heat it, we have to cool it, we have to condition it, remove the humidity out of it. In some specialized locations, we have to modulate the amount of humidity that's in there. I'm thinking of a recent project we did with a museum. So help level set this conversation a bit by giving us some of the most common inefficiencies that are found when we're talking about airflow management.
Sure, Tim. So I guess, the first thing comes to mind is, whether the airflow management strategy is something that's being done actively or if it's an approximated airflow management schema. So, I'll dive into that a little bit deeper. Traditional measurement technology, it's vulnerable to contamination. Anything that's in the airstream can accumulate on some of the sensors that have been used for the last 50 years. And that has some downstream effects, typically leading to overventilation. Especially when people are trying to conserve energy, the knee-jerk reaction is, if we're getting bad data off of an active outside airflow measurement device, just bypass that information and, exclude it from the airflow measurement schema. The other challenge that traditional measurement has is that, the location of where the devices need to be landed in order to produce an accurate measurement aren't always in line with the reality of the geometric layout for mechanical system and the ductwork. So, that also has some implications on, how to maintain those devices. They typically require some sort of recalibration every 6 months. So, what we see more than anything else is that people bypass active outside airflow measurement and then rely on the position of an outside air damper to approximate the amount of air that's coming into a building. That calibration is performed by an air balancer, and it's usually done at code minimum settings for the airside supply fan and for the demand in the individual zones. So, you've got a balancer that will do everything 100% correct. Will detail the position of the outside air damper at minimum and maximum position in order to deliver the code required amount of outside air. But as soon as buildings start to become loaded and the demand for thermal comfort increases, then what typically happens is that the supply fan begins to modulate to higher settings, overventilating the spaces, and again compromising energy efficiency.
So it sounds like a lot of maintenance issues or concerns where measurements begin to drift, people fall back on unreliable measures, and then when they do try to fix it, it's going back to some sort of standardized minimums. It's really not an optimization metric.
I'd say that's a good summary. Yes.
Okay, thank you. Well, that's great. Dave, to you now, I know you've worked on countless projects across nearly every vertical, whether it be K through 12 or healthcare, pharma, office buildings. When you're talking to clients, what are some of the typical things that they're trying to achieve while balancing airflow or environmental quality and energy usage?
Right. Yeah. Thank you. I think the big one for most facility managers that are operating buildings, no matter what vertical they're in, they're really trying to minimize complaints first and foremost. And as it's typically the number one complaint is hot cold calls, and or feeling of lack of airflow or stuffiness in buildings, right? So that's first and foremost because their phone is ringing, their boss is calling them, and people are just unhappy when that happens too often, and it becomes a cycle. And it even becomes a little bit trickier, like you said, the balance when you get into certain mandated areas, like carbon mandate areas, particularly along the Northeast that has local law 97 in New York, BERTA in Boston, and so on and so forth, where they're really, basing everything on the Energy Star benchmarking platform to set the platform for, what you need to do to reduce carbon, while at the same time provide a healthy building to their tenants or to their stakeholders to do that. So it becomes a real balancing act to maintain that, between the mandates as well as the ASHRAE and other indoor air quality codes. So, I think that's always the key, and it takes a while, I think, to settle that out. When the facility team and their consultants and other suppliers, kind of have to help all pitch in to maintain that. So it really requires a strategy, and it's not going to happen overnight. It's a little bit of a balance. And then obviously, as more people are coming back into the offices today, and filling, the space in different areas, that even creates another problem. Do you consolidate? If you got 5 floors, you consolidate, your organization, and it builds up onto 3, and that kind of throws the building off as well. So that's kind of where that whole airflow measurement, really kind of comes into play, to balance the ventilation piece of it and make sure you're at least close to hitting that indoor air quality codes that you're trying to get, as well as maintaining, your balance, with that on the supply side. So another thing is, taking the start trending, utilizing the building automation system for trending both, the energy consumption, as well as the IAQ aspects of it, along with some of the other measurements you're going to get off the airflow measurements, things like that, utilize an analytics package to really start trending that, identifying areas, you're seeing trending in the wrong direction, and prompting additional alerts on where things might need to be adjusted based on the depth of the analytics package you have, and knowing how to use it and making those adjustments in the controls and the BAS and maybe other things that might be creating, that kind of almost tension between the indoor air quality and the energy reduction plan that they're trying to achieve as well, to eliminate any fees.
Yeah, and clients don't typically come to you and say, okay, Dave, I want 8 air changes per hour and I want to reduce my energy by 35%. Go make it happen. They're not asking that kind of specific set of parameters on you. They're just saying, help me.
Help me figure it out, because it's one size does not fit all, as you know. Every building is different. Even if there's duplicate towers sitting next door to each other, they're going to behave differently.
That's right. Yeah. And then each vertical has its own sort of requirements. And going back to what Jesse was saying, there are those standardized minimums even per different class of office building.
Correct.
Or
and there's a big push, I know in Delaware, for example, during COVID, of different AQ funding to provide, whether it might be in the school, certain types of filtration systems, or providing additional outdoor air adjustments, on unit ventilators, rooftops, whatever it might be, to create more ventilation than maybe what they needed, but just kind of that effort to try to reduce, I guess, contamination of, COVID, and making parents and students, giving them an opportunity to be healthier.
There's a lot of questions too around, you mentioned work from home and now people coming back into the office. I think there's a few people that are trying to remember what it was like when people were back in the office. And,
Yeah.
and while they ramped down a lot of their energy usage because they were turning everything down to those minimums, now they're ramping it back up because, whoa, there's 10 people in this room, when for the last 2 years there was 0 on average.
Yeah.
Bala, I want to turn to you now. So you've worked with clients throughout the value chain of buildings and organizations and REITs and property managers and all kinds of projects as well. And you've seen a lot of different types and kinds of technologies that got put into place to serve a lot of these end user needs. So turning away from maybe some of the goals that Dave was talking about, can you talk about the kinds and types of technologies or sensors that you're seeing as being most needed or useful to hit some of these goals?
Thank you, Tim. First and foremost, thank you for the invitation for Boma Canada to participate in this. Before I answer the technology question, the type of technologies, maybe perhaps I'll comment on some of the statement that Dave made with respect to balancing the efficiency side and the IAQ. And throughout the COVID, we held a number of webinars and seminars focusing on this, because longest time we've always focused on energy efficiency, and IAQ was kind of running parallel, but it's the focus was sustainability and energy efficiency. But then we were hit with COVID. So what we've been saying since then and during the COVID is that it is never a competition between energy efficiency and mental quality. Hands down, that has to be the priority. Then when it comes to energy efficiency, and looking from a building operations perspective, then it's a case of, okay, you have a certain building operating conditions that you need to achieve. Then when you equate that to energy efficiency, then we have to look at what's the optimized way of running that building to meet that requirement, that facility requirement. So yes, you may end up increasing your energy use, but that's okay. But if it means meeting your current facility requirements, then that has to be first. But then the second layer to that is now make sure you're running it in an optimal way. So I just want to comment on that. So coming back to the technology question, yes, we have your technologies or sensors to control, do moisture control or energy. And one of the biggest now area and health. So there are sensors that can do, pathogen detection, CO2 level sensors, enhanced moisture control sensors, and including temperature sensors. I mean, there's always some debate during the COVID side when all the buildings or most buildings are putting various sensors to test, check for variance in temperatures of people who are walking through. Does that, breach any privacy laws and things like that? And there are technologies I know kind of tested during COVID was right down to almost like comes down to profiling people. It can detect facial features, and it can do serious AI-based analysis. And we were kind of pushed back on that because it's kind of, I guess it's taking to Big Brother realm of building control. But we are not limited by technologies. But I think, as with any integration of technologies, I think it's important to understand what the building needs first. and not focus on integrating technology.
Mhm.
When they take that approach, things usually fail. But on the other hand, once you know the what your building needs, and then kind of work back from that to integrate the proper technologies, we find that usually leads.
So Bala, we were able to catch most of that. I'd say about 90% of it, and totally made sense. And if you wanted to jump out of the meeting and jump back in, now would be a fine time to do that. Because I'm going to turn to Jesse next. A lot of these different technologies and implementing them, different kinds of sensors, and prioritizing the needs of the space, as Bala was saying, and I do think that it does. While there shouldn't be a competition between the two, there does seem to be a lot of pressures around, well, how am I going to pay for it if I'm a real estate investment firm or just a property owner in general? There's NOI and ROI that's going to be expected for any kind of investment I make. One of the best ways to see that is through regulatory or incentive programs. So Jesse, I wanted to ask you, what have you seen being available in the marketplace for building owners as we try to hit these kinds of goals and initiatives that Dave and Bala have mentioned?
So I guess we'll go from the we'll go from the incentives first. Um, you know, we're pretty much every utility company, at least within the United States, and I've had the opportunity to speak with a couple of Canadian utility providers as well. They have some manner of rebate structure for facilities that are investing in HVAC mechanical upgrades. A lot of it has to do with, again, it's the reduction of demand for the utilities, and that's where they incentivize the building owners. Now, some of those structures can be prescriptive, meaning that they have some manner of empirical data that says if you were to improve your economizer control or replace your chiller, and it meets a certain threshold for energy efficiency, then the building owners are rebated based on the square feet of the facility that's impacted by the energy improvement. And I've seen a couple of different structures around that. Most of them are somewhere in the neighborhood of, say, 4 to 13 cents per square foot, based on a variety of factors. And then that can have to do with cooling, and it can also have to do with heating. But the goal is obviously, at the end of the day, the facilities should consume only the code minimum required, or as low amount of utility as possible. So that's some of the activity from the incentive side. Some of the other incentives I've seen have to do with just commissioning, and whether it's retro commissioning or monitoring base commissioning. And when thinking about the specific impact of the amount of outside air that's coming into the building, what a lot of these commissioning agents have found, and even the balancing community has found, is that buildings as they age, they're not maintained to the to the ideal levels that they were when they were originally commissioned, and so just having a process to retro commission can also yield some significant improvements or energy efficiency gains. And one of them that really jumps out at me is just being able to monitor with any amount of precision what's the position of that outside air damper, because that's going to tell you, or it's going to significantly influence the amount of air that's coming into the building. So switching gears kind of to the second portion of the question, the regulatory side of things. I wouldn't say so much regulatory as certification. There's a couple of different organizations that are out there. U.S. Green Building Council, I mean, that's one that really comes to mind. They're the ones that are distributing the LEED certification for buildings. But recently, especially coming out of COVID, there's been the rise of some other indoor air quality certification bodies, whether it's WELL or Reset or Fitwell. And, anecdotally, I actually shared this during a conversation at Bomex in Canada. We've heard that real estate owners that are investing in that level of certification, the reset, the well, they've been able to command premiums of 20% on top of 20% rent on top of what they've seen from other similar spaces. So there's obviously your ROI first, and then your NOI second.
That's 20%. I hadn't heard that number. That's actually quite amazing.
Mm-hmm.
I had heard in the past that a lead building oftentimes would get you around 9% on average increased tenant rent, but 20%, that's extremely extremely beneficial. Yeah.
Yeah, small sample size. I don't know the level of adoption of any of those certifications, but the people that value the indoor air quality and the certification of that space, they're willing to pay that premium.
Yeah, I did see one chat just come in. If you could cite that, maybe that's something we could follow up afterwards with the citation for that extra 20%, if it's available, if it's documented.
Sure.
The other thing around regulatory that I've seen, and I'll use Illinois as an example, there's been both a House bill and I think it was a Senate bill, state House and state Senate.
Mm-hmm.
At least one of them passed and required indoor air quality monitoring for all the schools in the state of Illinois. That's not a small number of buildings. But one thing that's interesting then is the appropriation. So how are we supposed to pay for this? And I know in one bill there was appropriations attached to it, and perhaps that's the one that didn't pass. But it is interesting. So I think there's government organizations, particularly schools, when we're talking about youths and children and minors and minorities, that there are funds and interest around making sure that indoor air quality is a priority for those groups that kind of sit under the umbrella and authority of the government. So it's just very, very interesting to see how that's going to play out. Again, it always comes down to the money. So where are you going to pull that money from? But hopefully then on the other side, and I think that's maybe where you've seen some of the monitoring-based commissioning as well, there are savings, significant savings on the back end of programs like that. Dave, let's talk about implementing some of these projects. So assuming that the budget's there, assuming that the funding is available to some extent, what are some of those key considerations in implementing a project? And again, I'm thinking primarily of existing buildings or retrofits. New buildings are kind of their own thing. But there's always this concern that it's going to be a massive expense and a massive overhaul. So what are some of those key considerations?
Yeah, so I'm going to start with that word, it depends. And then follow up with here's some examples that can fall under that depends, because again, every building's a little different. So one is understand the current operating parameters of what that building is, how it's meant to function, how it was designed. Also check against the current occupancy versus what it was designed to do versus actual. So that could be some airflow monitoring just to get an idea what's there. People per square foot, CFM per square foot. Make sure the current MEP HVAC systems are operating at performance levels and have the capabilities to maybe change a little bit based on some things we might end up changing. Same thing with the building BAS system and controls. What rev levels are they at? Do they have capabilities for changes in sequence of operations? That's probably one of the easiest things you can do. Jesse mentioned retro commissioning and things like that. That's probably the number one ECMs that we see big energy services companies going after, and come after us to help them with that.
And an ECM isn't
energy conservation measure, let's call it for that. And you could probably name it other different things. What region of the country is it in? So is it in an area where you're in a mandated area or a deregulated area where you're going to have more incentives than other maybe areas there, along with the cost of utilities? where the applicable codes that's in that area, whether ASHRAE guidelines for redesigning and things like that. Again, going back to BERDO or Title 24 in California or local law 97 in New York, on and on. What do you need to do within that to maintain your, energy efficiency baselines and provide that reduction plan along with all this stuff that goes along with that. So that's a few. Once you know that, again, probably the first step I would recommend is that retro commissioning piece of it. Really understand, go through the system. What's the data that you're gathering off? What's the performance that's happening with the HVAC and chiller and everything else going on? You may want to add airflow stations, or sensors, if that's not in there, to supplement that. That's a fairly low cost opportunity. Can we revive the current sequence of operation to have more resets based on airflow, based on outside air temperature, based on, if you can gather sensors from multiple locations and put it into a reset program for whether it's discharge air, airflow, whatever it might be. And then, take in the input of IAQ sensors, because that's going to give you that reading, what's the CO2 levels, what's the humidity, everything else that kind of goes into that calculation. And then along with occupancy sensors, whether they're tied into the BAS system or they're an external type add-on, just for simple occupancy sensors, to keep it simple. So that would be probably my first approach, and that's typically the way I do it with clients, is we come in and really more offer a recommissioning aspect of it, if we think that's the first right move before you start tearing stuff apart.
That is like the perfect seasoned expert answer, because so much of it is like, it's not that what you said was basic, but what you're saying and advocating for is going back to the basics.
Yep.
So much of what is helpful is the building was commissioned at one point, and the assumption can be that it was commissioned properly.
Yep.
And so if you just go in and review the overrides, review the schedules, review the occupancy, there's probably a good chunk there that you could save.
Yep.
And then you started going through all those other things, optimum start, stop. Can we add just a few reasonable sensors that are now going to give you more information so you could kind of wring out the extra drops? I don't want to take away from analytics companies at all, because they absolutely have a place, and they help a lot of that drift not happen. But many times when you go in and implement an analytics platform, what they help you do is revert back some of those things that you were just talking about, set back to how it's supposed to operate, and then maybe take into some consideration, we have a little bit of old system and a little bit of new, and those were never really coordinated together to make sure that it was that they were working properly together. So once you do all that, then go and apply your analytics, and that'll give you the extra 10-15% you probably didn't even know was there. And that's more difficult to find. Yeah, that was great. I really like that answer.
I've told it a few times before, I think.
I imagine. Yeah. But again, I think it's so important to remember that so many of these projects are not massive overhauls. We're not talking about a rip and replace of all your stuff. A simple consultation, a simple assessment, some recommendations on a few new technologies you could implement, and you can make massive changes to your energy consumption and your cost. And then ultimately, going back to what Bala was saying, the importance of how that building is being used for tenants and occupants.
Correct. And modify it as it changes. I think one of the biggest things we always tell our clients is that, even though we're installing building automation systems and things like that, that building and that system is going to drift, over the first year. So, the importance of staying on your maintenance routines, looking at your trends, things like that, what's changed, and reevaluate. So, and, today, some of the technology allows you to continuous commissioning processes.
Yeah. Especially in an automated sense, where now you're kind of removing that manual observation. Bala, let's go back to you here. Welcome back. So speak a bit more about your organization, BOMA Canada. How are you coordinating with private and public entities to meet some of these goals? Are you seeing a lot of regulatory requirements being applied to the market?
I would say yes. I mean, apart from the compliance from a operational level like ASHRAE and those standards, there's also a changing or rapidly evolving regulatory landscape with respect to emission standards for building. I know it's south of the border for us. There's a lot more happening, but in Canada, we for example, the city of Vancouver, and then they kind of took the trying to regulate at the regional level, whereas the province of Quebec, they made it into provincial regulation. And then city of Toronto recently, when I say recently, late last year, agreed to explore implementing building minimum performance standards level or emission performance standards. So these things are happening and they're evolving fast. So our role within that is to ensure that those regulations, there's a degree of consistency, because the last thing we need with members who have buildings across Canada is a patchwork of different policies and regulations that makes life difficult. So yes, we are fully endorse the reason behind it, especially if it's health and safety based. But as far as the environmental based, yes, we are fully behind it, but we just want to make sure that these things are rolled out in a reasonable timeline, providing sufficient time for the market to catch up and have the training. Now, going back to one of the comments you made, Tim, you said, we can assume that the buildings are commissioned properly. Well, the reality is that I'm reading this article somewhere a few years back that over 50% of the buildings are not commissioned properly. So, because of construction delays, because of other reason, schedules, commissioning is one of the items that usually done last, obviously, but they take a lot of shortcuts. And another layer to that is training. Operator training is the last one to drop too, because again, we need to get the buildings open and certain things need to happen and to facilitate occupancy. But those things are usually dropped off and will come back to haunt us a few years down the road. So I just wanted to kind of share my view on that. Is most buildings are not commissioned properly.
Well, I'm glad you called me out, because literally as I was saying that, I remember thinking to myself, well, not necessarily. It was a you can't put the toothpaste back in the tube sort of moment. So I just rolled with it. But of course, you're there to keep me honest, which I really appreciate.
And the other thing is, Jesse mentioned building certification. Yes, building certifications, and we offer one to BOMA Best. That's we have over 4,000 buildings certified, and it's available in the US and globally as well. But the certification cannot solve your problems. Certification is those who use certification, irrespective of what the program is. If you're using that as a validation of your performance, I think kind of misleading, because they give a snapshot on time. So we want to focus on, and I know, Dave, you mentioned about continuous commissioning. I think programs is like the latest revision of BOMA Best is designed to kind of focus on, get somebody on track to decarbonize and improve performance, but it acts as a tool first. So it gives a management control first and being treated as a tool first, and then certification is that's that plaque on the wall. Yes, it's great to have that third-party validation, but focuses on how you run your building on a day-to-day basis. And we talked about what's the actual benefits. Like some of the stats coming out of our program is there's over 50% reduction in emission. And there's over 25% reduction in energy, and then 1 in every 4 buildings that's certified, I'm talking at the high level, at the platinum level, they have 94% waste diversion. I know we are focused, our focus of this conversation is airflow, but ultimately all these pieces kind of flow into that because it all impact indoor environment quality. And also water, for example, we don't really talk about water in terms of performance, but then you also say 36% water by going through the program. But again, it's not just a one-time deal. It has the focus on how do you address these elements as the focus may change from year to year, but overall is the whole package that we need to make sure that the building is focused on for as we look into the performance as a whole.
I always struggle with these kinds of conversations because it's so easy to, our whole industry is so interconnected. And you're talking about kind of that snapshot view. And yes, that's been a critique of things like LEED in the past. We're talking a lot about that with cybersecurity as well. Whereas, just because you say you're cybersecure today does not mean that you are cybersecure tomorrow. And so, what does a certification look like? What does an annual audit look like? So I think all that to say, there are conversations in the space around what that continuous auditing looks like, continuous commissioning as well. Fantastic. So, Jesse, just for everyone, obviously the panel here, and then all the audience and anyone listening after the fact, these are never meant to be a sales pitch, but I am going to mention a product of ours. So Jesse, looking at you, airflow management has been a massive point of conversation here at KMC as we've launched our airflow management station, or AFMS solution. But rather than necessarily talk about the solution, I invite anyone to go and look at it at their leisure. Can you speak to some scenarios or where optimizing airflow has had great benefits?
Yeah, I mean, I can lay out a couple of them. Now, the ones that really come to mind have to do with some of the school districts we've worked with over the years. Chicago Public Schools and Denver Public Schools have been phenomenal clients and adopters of a really holistic approach to energy efficiency and indoor air quality. Some of the challenges that they face, though, similar to anybody else that's out there, would be having a comprehensive approach, or having something that can be easily replicated across the district, so that they not only establish an appropriate baseline, but have a sustainable mechanism in place to build upon their instances of airflow measurement as their budget affords for them. So, one of the big pushes that I've seen, and the unique use cases of our airflow measurement technology, has been for in classrooms, in K-12 classrooms, quantifying the amount of outside air that's being brought in through unit ventilators. Just the physical limitations, the size of the mixing box, the size of the outdoor air intake has prohibited the use of some of that traditional technology in order to quantify the amount of outside air that's being brought into those classrooms. We've helped a couple of different school districts address those concerns through the use of our technology, and that gives them the ability to not only monitor the indoor air quality, the health of the building, but also some of the long-term performance aspects of that equipment. They can actually begin to form some predictive analytics around when they need to schedule their maintenance, or when they might need to replace some units. So that really comes to mind as a differentiated use case for the technology that we're producing.
So again, just to summarize, we've talked about the importance of optimizing outdoor airflow for those larger units. Obviously very important. Any kind of technology that can then be applied to smaller units, or units that maybe not fit the existing kind of technology, that just extends the benefits of airflow management and optimization down the path, down the road, or down the stack of technology, if you will. Whichever analogy you want to use around going down. Yeah. What about you, Dave? Any good case studies that you could share around airflow management?
Yeah, it's probably a hybrid, but few years ago, we still have the client, but out in our West Coast division, we work with one of the largest developer owner operators in the U.S., mainly in California. They have about 590 office buildings, and so one of their big challenges were this is pre-COVID. They're starting to lose, their tenants. They were not renewing. The new tenants were down, and so on. So what they've just started attributing that to was going back to one of my first statements, hot cold calls, that were driving, their tenants to complain, along with air quality issues, even kind of really before it came in vogue, with COVID. So we worked hand in hand with them to develop, actually ended up being a patented item, kind of a VAV multi-zone type system, because as you know, typical VAV systems, will serve multiple offices with one sensor, which is not optimal for anybody. So we kind of make this thing kind of looks like a VAV box with, up to 6 to 8 drops coming out of it with its own sensor that controls a damper along with a reheat, that's coming, from the air handler to the VAV box and then managed individually to get one minimum airflow, and then it sends signals back so that you're getting the right amount of outdoor airflow as well as mixed air temperatures and static that's required to meet, and this is in California, Title 24, which is pretty stringent codes that you have out there. So then COVID hit. And then, as they started ramping back up, they actually created a COVID kind of, post-COVID move-in plan, that they talked about their return to work policy. And some of their things they're talking about aggressively monitor all installed CO2, humidity sensors, and graph those outcomes to that client. Along with that, we created an app for each tenant, individual tenant, that had their own room statistics or office stats on it. And then the client, in their new lease agreements, guaranteed indoor air quality within plus or minus of 1%, temperatures within plus or minus 1%, within their leases, because they wanted now to take this, scale it across all their properties. And it ended up bringing, I think Jess, you said NOI of 20% increase. Well, I mean, they are able to capture the market with more tenants coming in there because of a couple of those SLAs that they talked about. So, in order to deliver a much better indoor environment for their tenants, while at the same time managing energy, because each office had an occupant sensor for lighting as well as the temperature side of it. You also had a purge cycle. So if you had a meeting in your room, you could hit your app and it would purge for 60 seconds, to again get more air in than's required, but made people feel good, that they could do that. So those were a few things that came along with that, plus some other things, but all around airflow and measuring and monitoring, and give it the tenants, their own use for their particular space.
Hey, Dave, what a cool story about applying an innovative technology to a customer that was struggling, who then took some bold initiative around these SLAs, and then they were able to achieve it and scale it. I mean, that's fascinating. Absolutely fascinating. We have less than 60 seconds left. There was one question, Jesse, I'll give you 20 seconds to answer it. Do you ever think we'll be able to eliminate the need for a balancer's report if there's a proper, he mentions AFMS, but if there's a proper airflow management system?
I'm never going to say that there's a computer replacement that 100% addresses the need for human intervention.
Yeah, and I agree. Very good. And all the tap guys have a big sigh of relief. No, absolutely. Okay, panelists, thank you so much. What a great conversation. Really, really enjoyable. Great content. Thank you for the stories. Thank you for the insights. Dave, Bala, Jesse, really appreciate you. Everyone listening and joining, thank you for that. And if you're listening after the fact, please reach out to us anytime. Any of us are more than happy to have these kinds of conversations. Reach out to Ari Rubin with KMC Consulting, and we could help coordinate all these folks on this call together into one project together to make sure that you are getting all the optimization you need, both in environmental quality and with energy as well. With that, I will say goodbye. Everyone have a wonderful day, and thanks for joining us.
Thank you,
All right.
Tim, for
Tim.
managing everything. Thank you.
Thank you.
Have a good weekend.
Have a
See
great
you guys.
weekend, everybody.
Thank you.